Tales of the Free Cities, Season 2, The Free Cities Draft. Episode 2, Inside the Castle. Daylight revealed an unforeseen advantage to the Academy's proving grounds, which Amber quickly came to appreciate. With no surrounding stands, the open pitch always seemed to hold a welcome breeze driving from the west. Without it, the heat from the unrelenting summer sun would have easily exhausted all of them after mere hours. Whoever had cleared the gardens ahead of their arrival had either done their research or simply been lucky. Either way, Amber always found herself thanking the unknown figure, even if the stiff wind did cause her passes to curl. That was an inconvenience she'd happily endure in exchange for blessed cool air. Today was no exception to their usual regime. They'd been playing since early this morning and were on their third game. The results mattered as little as the changing lineups. These games were intended to develop stamina and experience. Bragging rights over goals were on no one's minds. Amber slowed her pace as she crossed over the halfway line, wiping the sweat from her brow. Her own exhausted breath was deafening to her ears. She still hadn't quite gotten used to the lack of ambient noise during these practice sessions, so different from an actual game out in front of the crowds. At any of the major guilds, even training sessions on the proving grounds attract a cadre of onlookers, while here they were only her teammates and their opposition. In the eerie silence, she could hear every sound carry over the bare soil. Footsteps had her looking over her shoulder far more than they should have, and every utterance could be heard from one end of the pitch to the other.
Go, damn you! Run at them!
Amber didn't need to look to know the voice belonged to Champ. None of the other rookies were nearly so forthright, nor did they feel the need to bellow at the top of their lungs. In Amber's experience, the woman was deeply infuriating at best, and a nightmare just about any other time. Champ was driven like no other individual she'd ever met, on a par with a player in the big leagues. Everything was practice for the next game on the horizon, and if it didn't neatly fit into that, Champ didn't care for it in the slightest. Out on the pitch, she rubbed nearly everyone the wrong way with her brash calls. More than once, Amber had seen Nomad flash a snarky grin before wholly ignoring the play, just to piss Champ off in retaliation. The others were less overtly rebellious, but they were never shy about grumbling. There was only one player the woman seemed never to upset, a solitary figure who let the abuse roll away like water off a duck's back. Edge. Amber had challenged her roommate why on plenty of occasions, each time only receiving a shrug in return. The topic became a sort of tired, one-sided game before Amber finally gave up asking. Yet in spite of herself, she too had slowly developed a grudging respect for Champ, the same she suspected each of the rookies secretly held for the young woman. In Champ's mind, Amber realised, she was seizing the moment with as much passion and zeal as she could. If she didn't make the big leagues, it certainly wouldn't be for a lack of trying. By all accounts, she'd spent the best part of her life honing her prodigious natural ability, and it certainly showed. The way she carried herself and exuded confidence was powerfully reminiscent of a woman at least 5 years her senior and a seasoned veteran to boot. More than any of them, Champ was hungry. Hungry to be the first draft and for the success which would follow. Amber heard the familiar kiss of a leather boot meeting the ball.
Make it! Make the bloody play!
Champ yelled. Amber rolled her eyes as she pushed herself harder to meet the pass. Understanding she might have, but that didn't mean she had to be sympathetic in the face of obnoxiousness. The ball dropped at her feet, and with no immediate pressure from other players, Amber smoothly took control. The opposition was still returning from her half of the pitch. The combination of Nomad, Lane and Cammy, a potent striking side, but one which also played far too deep to easily stop a counter-attack. The moment she saw Knuckles waiting between her and the goal, Amber's heart sank. The opposition could afford to overextend themselves as much as they wanted. The burly Numasai might as well have been a solid brick wall for all he let players past him. She feinted a dash out to the left before ducking right, testing his mettle. For a split second she saw his forehead creased in confusion and thought she'd beaten him. But then reality reasserted itself, and the wind was knocked from her lungs, the world turning sky blue as his clothesline took her off her feet. She landed awkwardly, a jolt of pain radiating from her hip and across her back. Pale blue became a jumble of stars, and for a moment, Amber felt the world slip away. A hand shook her shoulder from somewhere beyond the blur, the kaleidoscope of spinning colours gradually slowing from blinding rainbow to merciful ebb. A large hand seized hers, and with a rush of air she was standing on unsteady feet, leaning against Knuckles until her balance returned.
You okay?
His eyes wore a concerned cast, matched by lips drawn in a thin line. Amber had quickly found Knuckles to be a gentle giant, in spite of his appearance or behaviour on the pitch. He didn't go easy on anyone, but was always the first to congratulate a goal for either side, grinning widely as his powerful arms slapped the scorer on the back. No doubt such behaviour sat very ill with Champ. As her head returned, Amber tried to catch up with the game. Gaffer had the ball and was cautiously advancing over the line, head moving side to side as he read the lay of the land. Nomad was too far out of position for a pass by far, still deep on the wing. Cammy sat in the middle but was fighting off Flea, the young lad nipping at her heels. That left just Lane, grinning handsomely, with one slender arm held aloft. He was barely a handful of paces deeper than Gaffer, but Amber had seen him like this before. His blood was up, and his eyes were wild. Even the air around him seemed somehow charged. With Champ bearing down on him, Gaffer took the bait, a neat pass rolling sideways to Lane. Amber's heart leapt as the wiry lad reacted with enviable smoothness, propelling himself into the ball path. One foot caught the pass on the arch between heel and toe and rolled it ahead. He made it look easy, every time. Champ swiftly changed direction to intercept the run, relentlessly pursuing the play. But Lane was more than ready. He punted the ball long and skipped into her path, blocking with his body. A neat heel hobbled one ankle and forced her to stumble before he sprinted away on the tips of his toes, leaving her in his dust to catch up with the ball. The whole interaction had barely taken a second, Amber guessed. It was just as well. She'd been holding her breath the entire time, leaving her giddy and grinning like an idiot. She couldn't help it when it came to Lane. He made everything look so effortless that other players seemed clumsy and sluggish by comparison. The final defender was Flea, a terrified expression plastered to his face. Nimble footwork forgotten, he stared as Lane flicked the ball high into the air to pass over his head and slip by. It didn't even land on the pitch before Lane struck it with a thunderous volley. Cutlass had come forward from her line at the goal but had no chance of reaching the shot in time. The ball slammed into the Scarecrow goalpost's head, snapping it clean off in a shower of stuffing. Amber joined Knuckles in a cheer, punching the air. The pair of them had been watching spellbound, witnesses to true footballing greatness. She wondered if this was how a young Spigot or Brisket had been. She didn't know of any player who could match that strike, or the way Lane had beaten the others. Lane jogged back up the pitch with a soppy smile. Champ insisted the expression made him look like a half-wit, but Amber tended to disagree. Somehow, it fit him perfectly, and was entirely endearing. She risked one last look, committing the sight to memory as best she could, before the blushing got too bad, and she had to look away. Embers swirled around the fire, mesmerising specks of bright orange floating on the wind. Amber caught herself remembering the hearth inside the drunken seamstress, and shook the thought clear of her head. With every day it was becoming easier to forget her past, but the memories couldn't fade anywhere near fast enough for her liking. Although she typically preferred to socialise, tonight she'd kept close to the fire. Edge had been teasing her in front of Lane again, and Amber sat down hoping the firelight might hide the colour of her cheeks. Thankfully she couldn't see him to test herself. He'd slunk away earlier, as he did most evenings. Usually he returned some hours later with that lopsided grin on his face. Instead, Amber found herself watching Cutlass and Knuckles in their favourite pastime, dicing over a handful of coins. There wasn't any real value to their game. Regardless of who won, come evening's end, the old coppers would be divvied out equally without fail, ready for the next round. They were a strange pair. Knuckles was broad-shouldered and heavily muscled, with colourful tattoos that appeared to dance and writhe in the flickering light. Next to him, Cutlass looked tiny, lithe, wiry, her untamed hair a shock next to her friend's tight knot. Amber had quickly come to know most of the other women well enough, but Cutlass remained a mystery, fascinating her as only an enigma could. Rumour had it she already was the target of several guilds in the draft, most of whom either wanted a goalkeeper for their roster or planned on denying their rivals one. This information, coupled with her age, lent her a mature sophistication unmatched by any of the other rookies. It was a sense only aided by her infamous past. Amber knew the dark rumours surrounding Cutlass's previous life all too well, or, more precisely, at least as many of them as anyone seemed to. Cutlass was far from tight-lipped, after all, but because she always chose to speak about her past in abstract terms or dismissive tones, she only managed to cultivate an even greater aura of mystery. When listening, Amber could never lose the suspicion that some intangible truth was always bubbling just beneath the surface, merely awaiting the right question to bring it to light. And then there was Cutlass herself. She certainly didn't match how Amber imagined a pirate to be. Possessed of a strange aloofness, tempered by a contradictory self-deprecating mirth, Cutlass spent most of her time prancing around as though she were dancing. She laughed at just about any joke, occasionally rattling the speaker with a terrifying deadpan expression, as though she'd suffered the greatest offence, only to guffaw a second later. She did at least drink like a pirate. Always first to open the wineskin, she'd proven time and time again she held her rum better than some brewers Amber had known, necking the dark rum that burned Amber's throat with barely a tremor. In spite of all of this, or, as Amber suspected, because of it, Cutlass was adored by the group. After first seeing them sit down to dice, Amber had wondered if Knuckles was sweet on his companion. The game seemed almost intimate, like two lovers dancing around each other, always on the cusp of embrace. She'd abandoned that idea by now. The tall new Messiah was probably the most honest person Amber had ever met, his steely eyes matching an intensely calm demeanour. Watching him with Cutlass had taught Amber theirs was a relationship born of companionship rather than romance. Knowing to keep people at a healthy distance could have been a lesson he'd learned growing up, besides. Unlike Cutlass, Knuckles' former life was all obvious, etched into his skin by the tattooist's ink and the scars crossing his torso. A particularly jagged slice dominated from his hip to his ribs on one flank, a ridge of painful and angry-looking flesh Knuckles called his fate line. All told, it had been the final injury which had forced him to confront his prior existence for what it was and aspire to better himself. She'd been relieved to hear it. Having grown up around brewer gangs herself, Amber better understood the life than anyone else here. All too often, gangers told stories which ended in silence, the fate of their allies unspoken. Knuckles deserved far better than such an ending. A soulful crooning announced the return of Lane, and suddenly Cutlass and Knuckles were quite forgotten, as he flopped down next to Amber at the fire. For a moment she grew concerned, noting a sort of hollowness that had taken hold, before the warmth of the fire and his easy smile banished such thoughts. He was relaxed and composed, hair flopped over one side of his head.
Hey, Amber lass. Saw you land pretty hard today. Everything okay?
His drawl was as charming as ever.
Fine, thanks.
She managed not to squeak the answer, feeling absurdly proud of herself. Lame seemed to consider this before nodding.
Alright. I wanted to see, just make sure.
He pushed himself back to his feet, long arms swaying.
I'm headed back.
Amber was about to offer to join him when Cutlass distracted her, the pirate crowing as she won the final coin in the pot. By the time Amber stood and looked around, Lane was gone. She sighed, mostly at herself, She'd likely just have embarrassed herself talking to him anyhow. Walking back alone, she found herself reflecting upon the experience so far. The other rookies were extremely welcoming, and thanks to the academy she had a safe place to sleep, as well as rations to keep her fed and watered. In return, she only needed to attend practice drills each day, honing her skills on the pitch in advance of the Free Cities draft. She'd somehow landed on her feet with spectacular fortune. Yet the draft remained a hopelessly daunting prospect. Amber knew she had some natural aptitude, but everyone here still felt easily out of her reach, their skill far beyond hers. She doubted she would ever feel as practiced or commanding as Gaffer, or display a quarter of Edge's flair or Knuckles' robust reliability. And players like Lane and Champ existed on another level entirely. They were true legends in the making. She'd not spoken to the others about her fears, keeping the secret even from Edge. Most nights it kept her awake in fits of restlessness, while doubts ran wild through her mind. What if none of the guilds wanted her? If she didn't make the draft? She'd be out on the streets again, adrift once more. Amber felt a shudder of dread pass through her and turned her head towards the academy, pretending its tall walls and spires were part of a castle in which she could hide from her doubts. In better times she might have laughed at the childish conceit, but in her heart she didn't feel strong enough. Not yet. There was always another day, she continually told herself, a far-off time when she could grow up and stop being frightened. Until then? Until then, the only option was to throw herself into practice as hard as she could, just like Champ. Rumour had it the scouts were coming to observe them tomorrow, the first time since Amber arrived. She knew she'd feel like an imposter on the field, a mummer playing a role, but mime her way through the games she would. There could be no failing at the first hurdle, even if the trial did terrify her. Step after step she drew closer to her castle. It would keep her safe until morning at least. The Free Cities draft was written by Sherwin Matthews and is the sole property of Steamforge Games Limited. It is reproduced here with their kind permission and their continued support.